We're continuing our study on the Restoration Movement churches, the Churches of Christ, and what we do and why we do it. Last week we dealt with the fact that there's only one head to the church, that's Jesus, and that there's no body larger than the local church here on earth. And one of the verses we used was in Acts, the 15th chapter. And that was where we studied about the Jerusalem conference, where the church in Antioch sent Paul and Barnabas to the church in Jerusalem to make sure that the two churches were teaching the same thing. But the thing that we found there was that even though the apostles were there, the decision was made, it's in verse 13, and after they finished speaking, James replied, "Brothers, listen to me. Simon has related how God first visited the Gentiles to take to them people for his name, and with it the words of the prophets agree." And he goes on, makes a long speech, and in the end he says, this is my decision, this is what we're going to do. Even though there were apostles there, the decision was made by the elders, and James was the spokesman for the elders. And the reason I went back to that is so that we can understand the biblical and scriptural form for a local church government. Because everybody does things in their own special way and a little bit different. But the idea of a restoration church is to see in the Bible the way it was done originally and do it that way. That's a very simple concept, but it seems to be hard for sometimes for people to understand. Let's turn to Philippians, the first chapter, and verse 1. To Paul and Timothy, servants of Christ Jesus, to all the saints in Christ Jesus who are at Philippi, with the overseers and deacons. And now we're going to go to 1 Peter 5, 1, 2, and 3. So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly. Not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. Here we see the word elders and the word oversight, which brings us back to that overseer. Now, I'm going to read 2 verses, and then we're going to discuss a lot of things going in and out of these verses. So turn to Titus, the first chapter, verses 5 through 10. This is why I left you in Crete, so that you might put what remained into order and appoint elders in every town as I directed you. If anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife, and his children are believers and not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination, for an overseer, as God's steward, must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain, but hospitable, a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine, and also to rebuke those who contradict it. For there are many who are insubordinate, empty talkers, and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision party. Now we're going to go to 1 Timothy 3, verses 1 through 7. The saying is trustworthy. If anyone desires to the office of an overseer, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil. Now, one of the things that I want us to see here is we're not going to go in to depth with these qualifications, but I want us to see, because we have these words, overseer, shepherd, and elder. If we read all those ones that we've read, we see that those names are used interchangeably. And that's one of the things that we need to understand about the government of the church, is that it is elders, but there are many names for that, and the different names describe different functions that office is to carry out. Now, when we were in Titus, he says that this is why he remained in Crete to appoint elders in every town. Now you notice there's an S on the end of that. He didn't say appoint elder. He said elders. So the original plan was that there was to be a multitude of people who had the oversight of the local church. Elders can be 2, 3, 4, 25, but elders is always plural. Those that have the oversight. And this was very common, and this is going to be important later. I want to get into that. This was very common. It was very easy for the Jews of the first century to accept this type of a government for the local church, because the Sanhedrin, which was over all of the Jews, was a board of elders. They even called them elders. They had that form. And the synagogues in the first century had a group of men over every synagogue that functioned exactly the same as elders. So this form of government of a multiplicity of men to have oversight was very easy for the Jewish Christians. It made sense. They were used to that. Now I want to get into the fact that we've been using these words and we see that they're synonymous. And I'm going to use the words as we find them in my Bible, and then I'm going to bring in the others. Elder, bishop, or I'm going to use my Bible. Elder, overseer, shepherd. These three names give the different descriptions of the job title. The elder was to be older, to show maturity and wisdom, which hopefully we gather as we get older. Unfortunately, I think I missed the train on that one. But then there's the overseer. That's the one that has the rule they have to watch out for. That's another thing, is that they're the ones that are taking care of things. And the third one is shepherd. Because if you don't throw the shepherd in there, and you just have elder and overseer, you get a group of dictators. But the job of a shepherd is to take care of the sheep. That's their job. It's not just to rule over the sheep. They take care of those sheep. They would sleep with the sheep. They would protect the sheep. That was their job. They loved the sheep. So we have these three titles, but now I'm going to throw some other words in there, because the New Testament as we have it was translated from Koine Greek. But before it got translated into English, they translated the Bible into Latin. And then finally, coming around comes to English. So we have various words that are used in the religious community, depending upon where they're from, to describe the same thing. The word in English, elder, in Greek, is presbyteros, or presbyter. Ever heard that before? Because some denominations has presbyters. Well, that's an elder. Same thing, same word. Just one's in English and one's in Greek. Now the word overseer. Well, in Latin, that's episkopos, which transliterated, instead of transliterated into English is bishop. So do some groups have bishops? And some have episcopos. You ever hear of the Episcopalian Church? It comes from that word. Now, most of those are used in a very similar fashion. Episcopos is used in a similar fashion to presbyter and elder. Now, bishop may or may not, but the one that is almost always changed in its meaning is the Latin for shepherd. word shepherd is pastor. Well, as we said, there was always a multiplicity of elders. And guess what? In those scriptures we read, we saw that the shepherd, the pastor, was the same thing as the elder, the overseers. But in our world today, we have taken the term pastor and made that a highfalutin, super holy title for preacher. Okay? I am a pastor because I'm an elder, not because I'm a minister or a preacher. And I would not be a pastor if I was alone. If Doug was not here to be a pastor, elder, bishop, overseer, shepherd, episcopos with me, presbyter, I think I left that one out. I couldn't be a pastor. Because there's only one chief shepherd. That's Jesus Christ. Everybody else is a co-shepherd, working together. Now, I'm saying that because in many groups, the pastor has the same authority as pastors. In many groups, the pastor is the yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir. In fact, I have to tell this story. We were at a little church in Templeton, California, and we had a Christian lady who was married to an older gentleman. And when I say older, I'm looking out here and we have a few older people here, but I'm not using that sense. That sense. You guys as babies. You were old and crotchety. We were meeting in a rented building, and when we would take the collection, guys would go, they'd pick it up, and then they'd go back to their seats, and they gave the collection trays to the preacher. And he went and put them in the kitchen so that the guys could go and count it. But the guy told me, he goes, yeah, I saw it. Boy, that pastor, he couldn't just wait to get his hands on that money. But all he did was take it and put it in the kitchen. But that's what he grew up with, was the pastor was the one who got the money, decided how it was spent, but in Bible times, there was no such thing as a single pastor, shepherd, elder, episcopos, presbyter, or bishop. And you go, well, yeah, a bishop is singular. Yes. In one of the major large denominations, a bishop is singular and he is over a bunch of churches. That came from a gentleman by the name of Ignatius of Antioch. He's what is called a church father. He's from the 2nd century, when the apostles had died out. And he he said that it was good that there be a bishop over the presbyters so that they might speak with one voice. They were having trouble with the Gnostic teaching, and he was afraid that if you had a bunch of people, they wouldn't be able to effectively quash this heresy because they would be different. Now go back to what I said. I want you to think. You know, this is preaching, but it's also teaching. I think that preachers should be more teachers than just expositors and exhorters. I think we need to teach. In the beginning, the church in Jerusalem was all Jewish, and as it spread out, Paul and Barnabas and all of them always went to the synagogues first and got Jewish Christians, and then the Gentiles came in. So even in the Gentile churches, there was a large Jewish group of people who thought that way, who had grown up with a Sanhedrin, who had grown up with elders. Now, I don't know if you got that when they taught you history about Rome, but Rome, which was the leader of all the Gentile world, Rome had a real problem with multiple rulers. They had triumvirates, they had all sorts of groups of bodies to work, and they always lasted just until one killed the other. That's just exactly how long they lasted. They were, and yes, they had a Senate, and it didn't work very well. That's why Julius Caesar took it over. The Romans and the Gentiles in general were not used to and did not have this concept of working together, of Dub and I getting together and talking things out and making a decision together using the Bible as a guide. They weren't used to that. That was not in their mindset. So, when Ignatius said this, it was not common. It was very uncommon, but they started going that way because don't we do things the way we're comfortable with? That's what we do. We do things the way we're comfortable. I want us now to read Hebrews 13, verse 17. 13, verse 17. Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you. You notice here in this passage, it's also plural, not singular. Obey the leader? No. Obey the leaders. They. It was easier for the 2nd and 3rd century church to change the government that Jesus instituted for the local congregation to a one-man rule, because that's what they were comfortable with. That's how they governed themselves. One problem we have sometimes in restoration churches is, even though we jump up and down and say that the government of the church should be a plurality of elders, there's a whole lot of congregations that have been around for 50 and 60 years and have never managed to find anybody qualified. And the real reason is not that they don't have anybody qualified, but what is our government? Our government is we all have a say. The idea of, well, there's two people that have oversight over us. We don't like that. No. I'm free. I get to do what I want. That's what I want. If you're going to be a restoration church, a true Church of Christ, you're going to have elders as soon as you can. Sorry. That's the way it is. And there is a reason for that. Because you know what? When we all have a say, well, guess who I'm going to look out for? Me. I'm going to look out for me. I remember my cousin saying, well, I understand the principles, but this person is going to give me more of my Social Security, so that's what I'm voting for. That's the way we vote in our government, and unfortunately, that's the way that it works when you have business meetings and such like, is everybody is looking out for themselves instead of realizing that the leaders of the church are to be what Hebrews 13, 17 says, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account. I will say one thing here. I've heard people say that one of the qualifications of being an elder is to desire the word. And that comes from back where we read there in 1 Timothy 3, the saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of an overseer, he desires a noble task. It says if. It doesn't say he must, because putting yourself in a position to be responsible for the souls of other people, that's crazy. Okay? Putting yourself in that position, if you really want that job, I don't think you deserve it. You know? You can desire it, but you desire it only because it needs to be done, not for the office itself. And I will say that there are qualifications, and those under the pastor system don't even bother to try to see that their pastors meet those qualifications. Most of those with presbyters, bishops, and others don't even try. Now, one of the things that I think that's important to notice is when you read that list of, we call it qualifications, it's not ever said what it is, it's just given a list. That this is what they are to be. You notice, none of them easily you can't give them a number. You know, then when you read these things, you know, it goes, well, not violent but gentle. All these things are looking and being subjective, because there's no scale that says, okay, this is gentle and this is not. And so when you look at those lists, you have to realize that there's no black and white. You have to look at them and see what they're there for, and understand that all those qualifications have a purpose. And I don't know anybody that's always sober-minded and always self-controlled. I know people that are sober and sober-minded and self-controlled, but they're not always sober-minded and self-controlled. That's one of the reasons you have a multiplicity of elders, because nobody's perfect all the time. It works better when you do that. And I will say one thing here, that when we look at the husband or one wife, we look at divorce, we look at death. But I think that probably in the first century, in the Gentile church, which is where these lists were read to, when you said husband of one wife, the first thing that went to their minds is not a polygamist. Because in our world, we don't think that way, because that's not part of our culture. That's just those weird people living in Arizona that have their sister wives. And those are not in Utah. They kicked them out of Utah. But that was probably the first thing that went through the people's mind when they read that, was not a polygamist. I think next week what we're going to do is we're going to look at how we look at the authority of Jesus. In our first lesson, we said we needed to do, in the name of Jesus, by his authority. Well, next time we're going to talk about a little bit of how we look at authority and how we can gain it from the scriptures. So if anybody needs to answer the invitation in a public way, you can come now. Please stand.